Are we set? There we go. Great. Thank you so much. So I want to welcome everyone. This is the Select Committee on the Future of Public Higher Education in Vermont. It's Monday, March 1st, as my husband says, rabbit, rabbit. So always the tradition on the first of the month. And, you know, I don't know if March is coming in like a lion and going out like a lamb, or if this is supposed to be the lamb and the lion, but I don't know about either one of those. But we're grateful to all of you for being here today. I think there's been a lot that has happened since our last meeting. And so I look forward to talking a little bit about that. I also, I've had a number of people tell me that they need to be done by 4 o'clock today. So I think I'm going to try if we can, but I'm not going to cut short the conversation. But if we're done conveniently by 4, then the people who have to leave won't be missing out. But again, I don't want to hurry anything along, but just know that there are 3 or 4 people that said that they need to step off at 4. The other thing that I wanted to just, before we got into the agenda, I want to switch agenda item 2 and 3. I want to ask Brian to first identify some focus areas that he sees from the NCHEM's proposal, or from the NCHEM's perspective, that he wants to focus on in the coming weeks, because I think that might answer. Then we'll go to areas of concern that we want to make sure that the committee, as a committee, that we have addressed, so that hopefully people will feel comfortable with the report. So I want to switch in the agenda. You'll see it says number 2 is identify areas of concern, and number 3 is identify focus areas. I'm just gonna switch that. With that, I would like to just begin our conversation. As you all know, the final report, you all got many copies, the draft, and then the final copy was released actually a day early on Thursday, the 11th. Thank you, Brian, Dennis, and Sally for making that happen. We distributed it as we did before to, I know that all legislators received a copy, and also the governor's office, and then it's been on our public website. So many people have viewed it. And so I want to spend a little time just hearing what, if people have heard reactions to it, what have been the reactions, and share some of that. But I also wanted to ask Megan Kluver, as the representative from the Vermont State College's Board of Trustees, to talk a little bit about the significant decision that the board made at its meeting last Monday. And so I think a lot of you probably have already seen all the press coverage that came with that, but I think it would be good for Megan as a board member to just share with this committee where our board stands on this. Because I think, just as a reminder, I think we've identified 3 key stakeholders in all of this in Vermont. One are the Vermont State College's Board of Trustees. The second is our legislature, and the third is the governor's office. And so making sure that we are bringing all of them together is really significant. So with that, Megan, I would just ask you to sort of give this group an update on the conversation and the vote that went on last week.
Thanks, Judy, I will. And the board, so last Monday, the board did vote on this and unanimously decided to move forward with the select committee's recommendation. And I'll share a few things behind that, but wanted to lead with that. So it was unanimous that this is the path forward. But there was much discussion behind that. And part of it was listening sessions where the board did invite the community to share perspectives on the select committee report. And I think one of the interesting takeaways from those listening sessions in the community was really the focus from students and some of the support that came particularly from students around this report and this direction forward. The second piece I would share is that in the board's discussion before the vote, there were 2 pieces that were important going forward. One was accountability. And so the board is going to be looking at over the next months, what are the metrics that we as a board look at to ensure that the colleges are tracking to this path and tracking towards that commitment to the state and to students. So that will be an important continued focus. And then the second, and I think this also picks up on a theme that has come out of this committee, was innovation, and that question around, does this push far enough forward? Are there other opportunities to truly be innovative? And I expect that as a board, we'll continue to take that conversation forward and look for ways as this moves forward to really look at this as the scaffolding and the blueprint of the future of the Vermont State Colleges, but to continue to build out that path of continuous improvement and continue to build out how we track the progress going forward. And I think that's the very high level piece of the discussion. Are there any questions that I can answer? Please, Senator Bruce.
That was a great summary. I'm just wondering, how was the question framed exactly? Was it a question of just supporting everything in the report, or was it framed on unification of the system, or what was the actual wording that was voted on?
Yeah. And I don't have the actual wording. So at the board meeting, Dennis and Brian came and presented the report, and then Chancellor Zadatny presented the path forward for the colleges, focused on the key themes of the report and starting to build towards how those themes will be operationalized. And the board voted to direct the Chancellor, in continued consultation with the presidents, to work towards that future state and to continue to put that plan in motion.
Okay, great.
Senator Bruce, I actually have the wording of the resolution. Would you like me to read that?
That would be great.
Okay,
Yep.
so the resolution is a full page, but I'll read you the significant components. It says the state create a select committee on the future of public higher ed in Vermont to assist the state of Vermont in addressing the urgent needs of the Vermont State Colleges and develop an integrated vision and plan for high quality, affordable, and workforce connected future for public higher ed in Vermont. And whereas, this is the key, the select committee has made numerous recommendations regarding the future of the Vermont State Colleges, including A, maintaining the Community College of Vermont as a separate institution while unifying the three remaining institutions under single leadership structure and accreditation. B, aggressive coordination of administrative services. And C, a significant increase in the amount of state investment in the VSC to address its structural deficit, mitigate the impact of COVID, and increase its annual base appropriation moving forward. And then it goes on to other whereases, but it picked up the three key components around unification, the administrative services, and the expectation that the state would make the state investment is a significant piece of. So those were the three key pieces.
Great, thank you very much.
Joyce?
Sandy.
Yes. Megan, if I heard you correctly, you said that they actually questioned whether we went far enough in the area of innovation. Can you share a little bit more about that, if possible?
There was one particular thread of conversation, and again, there's been several different areas that have come up in broad conversation. There was conversation around partnerships with high schools and how particularly CCV is partnering with the high schools. And I think these are areas where the board is looking to increase an understanding of what's happening today, and then to consider to think about what the opportunities are going forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Ann?
Yeah, so I just like to offer my perspective and what I'm hearing from a faculty standpoint as the lone faculty across the system. I have not heard a lot. And I will say that our president And I assume the other presidents are doing listening sessions. In fact, I think there may be one today with President Collins and the staff to discuss this. I know she's speaking to our faculty next Tuesday about it. I think that, one of the concerns, and I'm just wearing my other hat as chair of the Linden Faculty Assembly, is that I know many of you may or not be aware that all of the faculty assemblies, Castleton, VTC, MVU Johnson, and MVU Linden, unanimously endorsed the Labor Task Force report as a report that went forward. So I suspect that there will be more discussion about that. Again, in all fairness, that was what happened across the system, not with CCV, but with the other schools, and it was unanimous in all three cases. That's what I'm hearing. At least in Linden, I'm hearing some discussions I had with a couple of colleagues the other day. We understand, and again, I'm wearing my faculty leader hat. We understand, the message of unification and support this. But at Linden, I think you're seeing, and Johnson, a little bit of fatigue. We just went through this the last 2 or 3 years, a significant amount of work. And I think we're all kind of wondering, okay, what is this going to look like now that, those of us who have their boots on the ground, how do we unify programs? What's the process? What's the contractual obligations? What's the governance structure? There's a lot of unknowns, but I just think in Linden and Johnson, there is a little bit of fatigue, like, oh boy, here we go again. But I suspect there will be more discussion around this as the presidents have their listening sessions. And again, I haven't heard a lot yet, but I suspect that there will be more, but those are the things I have heard.
Joyce, I think Devin has his hand up.
Oh, Devin, go on. Go ahead. I didn't see that. Sorry. Thank you.
I just wanted to note some of the things that I'd heard on my end. I had actually heard a lot of confidence in what's going on. It was mostly spawned from at the board meeting, Chancellor's at these PowerPoint presentations showing the direction that we were actually going in, the plan and the presentation of what we're actually looking at, instead of it just being a conceptual idea. People could see what was happening next. That created a lot more confidence in what we were working towards. And I just wanted to make sure that that was voiced, that from what I've heard, both from students and from some faculty, from some staff at BTC, that they actually like what's going on and we are excited to see the changes that we make in the future. So I wanted to make sure we were aware of that.
Maybe the chancellor can just address, I believe, if I heard correctly, that the system is going to hire some a consulting firm. Is that right, Sophie, to start looking at this unification process, looking at programs and other things that are going to come up? Am I correct in that? Because it's pretty aggressive timeline, if I remember.
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of things. So one is that work was already underway both at Northern Vermont University and Castleton University over program duplication. And so there were faculty working with the chief academic officers back in the fall on that. And then when the select committee's report came out in December, which would have included VTC in a common accreditation, the decision was made to move forward and make that a tripartite discussion and not limit it to NVU and Castleton. And I'm not sure exactly when, I guess we're at the beginning of March, but I believe sometime in January, an RFP was put out and a group called RPK Group was retained to serve as consultants on program array. And so that work is already going on or is about to begin with an external consulting group. And again, will involve the chief academic officers, will involve the faculty as we move forward on that. And then separately, we've been talking about the need for professionalized project management and thinking about bringing in either a firm or an individual, but to help us make sure we have the expertise and we do this correctly from the beginning. and that we have some assistance to help us with that. Because as you know, we're kind of spread so thin. And even though we may have people internally that have that ability, they don't have the bandwidth to do it. So we have asked the legislature for money to help us assist with transformation, because we do understand that transformation has its own costs involved. And we do anticipate looking to hire some professional project management assistance.
Thank you, Sophie. I guess I would just also ask, are there any other people hearing reactions to the plan in general, the public? Do other folks, are other folks hearing anything on the ground? Megan, and thank you, Megan, for representing the board. Representative James.
Thank you. I think that this is maybe starting to be addressed, but one of the initial reactions I did hear from some colleagues in the legislature was that they were hoping the report would provide more detail and sort of more, I guess, more thinking about workforce development and the link between the state colleges and our workforce kind of pipeline. And I don't have a lot more detail than that, but that was one piece of feedback I wanted to bring back today. And I don't know if that's something that we could think about for the final draft, but I heard that from a couple of different folks, especially on the Commerce Committee.
Okay.
For what it's worth, I would just add that we did have, with the implementation plan that we showed to the Board of Trustees, we did include workforce development as part of that. And we are considering or planning on creating a workforce division as a way to be a front door for folks to come to find easy access into the Vermont State Colleges, and then direct them within the Vermont State Colleges to, so for example, if they come in and the programming that they're looking for is at CCV, they would then go to the CCV or to VTC or whatever. Because right now, our individual colleges all do a fair amount, some more, I would say, but we do a fair amount of workforce development, but it's somewhat invisible. So the goal would be to try and make it more prominent so people can see what we're doing and to really facilitate that moving forward.
Yeah, I think, I don't know whether I had heard you mention that in testimony before the Education Committee or whether Catherine mentioned it to me, but I'd love to kind of understand that a little bit more so I can speak about it in a more informed way. And then I don't know whether the concept of discussing this more then belongs in the next iteration of our report, or whether we leave that to you, to take the ball and run with it. So anyway, I'll just, I tossed that idea out there. It was very important to some people, and I think it's an important notion.
I think Representative James, you raise an interesting point, and something that we talked about a little bit in our steering committee meeting, I think. Remind me, steering committee members, if we talked about this or I've talked about it somewhere, that, I think, and Devin, I think, referred to it, that Chancellor Zanatni did a very involved presentation to the board about where, so taking the select committee's report and then the steps that we're taking for implementation. And in some ways, it gets to, people that want to get down below the 60,000 foot level. It answers a lot more of those questions about directional, how do we envision that? And so, thinking about keeping our report at the higher level so that people get we lay the groundwork, we set the guardrails, but then have the charge from the VSC board to the chancellor and the presidents about now, how do you implement it? And so the details around the next steps of implementation are in that report. And so, either we keep them two separate and we say to you or to Senator Baruth, if there's questions in the legislature, or to anyone, there is another report, and that's on a public, but it's on a different website, that, there's more detail behind this, but we want to keep the select committee report separate because it's not the VSC. There's only representatives of the VSC. This is providing direction. And then the more implementation and the lower level sort of, here's how we're going to take the recommendations of the select committee and move forward is, there's a lot of work that's being done in that area.
Yep. And if I can just offer, at NVU, we have 4 schools now, and the 4 heads of schools have been tasked with this duty of figuring out how these workforce related programs will connect to within their schools. So this actually started in the fall. So again, when we're down in the weeds, that's how it's kind of happening at NVU, is the heads of school are working with these type ideas and programs and what they're going to look like.
Brian, I could see you took off your mute. Did you want to say something?
No, I mean, I think it's been said, and I think it also, in the select committee report, the question of providing that direction from the legislature and the governor's office to the Vermont State colleges is also part of the way in which the select committee can address this topic, I believe, as well. So, and I know Representative James, who did a terrific job talking about the timeline of this legislative component, or legislature's responsibilities around this set of statement of policy priorities already. So I'm just, in terms of comprehensiveness as to how to address this topic of workforce development, there's a role to be played there as well.
Okay, if there are other reactions, let's just work them in, but I want to turn this over now to Brian and ask him to talk to us a little bit about the focus areas that he and Dennis and Sally have identified, along with comments that they've gotten from all of us and others about things that they know they want to add to or further develop in the next report. And then from there, I want to go to, from all of you, what are the areas that we need to make sure we address? Because I would love, and I think this would be powerful, but also if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But in the ideal world, it would be great if we as a group could unanimously adopt our final proposal, if that's possible. But so if there are things, I would like to leave today with anything that people feel like, okay, this is a showstopper for me, I cannot sign off on this. And then we have to decide as a group, is this something we can address or not? But so I would love to be able to, in April, say this was a report that is unanimously supported by this committee. But again, I don't know that we'll be able to get there. So I want to turn this over to Brian to walk us through what he sees, what he's identified as things that need to be added to our final report. Brian?
Thanks, Joyce. And in doing this, I want to be mindful of the change in the schedule that that Joyce and I worked out and laid in front of you for the remaining time of preparing this report, which is, we've got this meeting today, and then we've got one other one, I believe it's on April 5th with the select committee. And so unless we add more meetings, which I don't necessarily think would be needed, there aren't going to be a lot more time to really add really huge new substantive pieces. And that's okay, I think, because a lot of the work that this group has done was so heavily front-loaded in the fall and early winter. And I think that so far the project has moved forward pretty well. But there are some things that we need to do. Among them include a little bit of cleanup and trying to provide additional clarity and change some of the language to reflect the transition from the revised report to the final report, and we've begun doing that. We're going to address any remaining pieces of the outline that are no longer suitable for presentation. There's a lot of additional data exhibits that we've prepared and have not yet put in the report. I'm going to spend some time going through just to try to identify any high-level ones that would be helpful, just to provide some additional information for further work by the board, Chancellor Statney, or the institutions that might be useful in there. There's also this piece that we didn't know was coming when we produced the December 12th report, at least not in the form that it took, which is the topic we just had, where the board has adopted an implementation plan. I think it's probably suitable for us to find a place in the report to sort of articulate the fact that there's a handoff associated with these two efforts, and that they complement one another. And really the board's implementation plan in many respects is the manifestation of the select committee's recommendations, where the recommendations are targeted at the board and its institutions. So we'll try to figure out a way to put that language in. And then, but other than that, there's not a lot of substantive new things we're thinking about. On the implementation steps, though, we've, I think, accurately identified all of the right parties that need to adopt a response to the select committee's report. We put in some timelines for some of them, primarily the board and the chancellor's office. I think it's time for Dennis and I to run through and make sure that there aren't any more. And we are also, one of the things that we've been hearing from the steering group, from other conversations, is this question and this concern that the legislature this year may do the things that they're being asked of it in this report. How do we set up the legislature to continue to sort of support this work as it goes forward, and to ensure the legislature that that progress is being made in a timely manner? And so I'm not going to blame anybody else for this, but I've been thinking about what are those milestones that would really help the legislature recognize the progress forward in upcoming years. But I've always been thinking about them as a real metric, like you're going to have an additional X number of students who graduate over this period of time. And I think that what we've been thinking about more recently is, are there more process-oriented metrics that we might signal as being appropriate for the legislature to be mindful of as this transformation effort moves forward? So we have a few of those that we've been thinking about. There's, of course, a finance metric that's embedded in the report already, that there would be a $5 million reduction in the structural deficit each subsequent year. And then it may be possible for us to think a little bit about, a plan in place to reduce the carrying costs of some physical spaces through one means or another by $2 million in year one, $4 million in year two, something like that, as a way to really, for the legislature to see real evidence of progress. But there's a couple of things that give me a little bit that I think we need to write in the process of this. One is we need to recognize the uncertainty of the times that we remain in. And we also need to recognize and stay on the right side of the line, where the BCS board and the system leadership are really in the right place to define the detailed level of metrics. So we've got that. But there's some other process metrics that we might be mindful of, like, the accreditation stuff. And some of this stuff is in the transformation implementation plan that the board adopted last week. But accreditation substantive change proposal draft might be completed by a certain deadline with feedback received. A determination of which of the programs will be led from which campus sites, and including how to ensure that the elements of the VTC mission are preserved in the process. What does that look like, and how do you get there? There might be a metric that suggests that there's evidence that students from all parts of the state are being able to access programs throughout the system. This workforce development focus that Representative James brought up, there could be a more clear sign that the board is engaged on that in a substantive way. And there, again, a process question, so there's a dedicated leader associated with it. There may be some evidence in growth and employer outreach and contacts, and increase in non-credit hour non-credit programming. And then there's the thing that I've heard Jeff Weld say a number of times we need to address, because this has come up in some of the news reports we've seen around this issue of branding. And so the completion of that marketing campaign and outreach around how to address these branding concerns. The select committee is not really in the position to say this is the thing that Castleton's that the unified institution needs to project. That's a particular Castleton branding thing, but that conversation and plan can be identified, and evidence of it moving forward can be seen by the legislature. So those are just some ideas that we've been wrestling with that try to sort of stay on the right side of that line, where we're not, as a group of folks who aren't. I'm speaking on behalf of all of you. Some of you are expert in areas related to this. Not everybody is, but I think that we find that we identify the right place to put emphasis and to look for signs of progress, while letting the implementation of those activities take place at the system level and at the institutions. Excuse me. Other than that, I think those are the areas that we're focused on working on. But we're way too close to this at this point, and we may be missing something. So we're happy to hear what else needs from your perspective. We really need to sort of sew up or be clearer about than we have been, and as well as feedback on all of what I just said. So Senator Bruce.
I'm just wondering, as a metric about affordability, we've talked a lot about that. It seems one of the conditions of our general problem is that Vermonters can't afford a state college degree. And I know that in the spreadsheet with the various costs over the 5 years, one of the categories was dedicated to something and affordability. I want to say that was 17 million or something. So I have assumed that there was thinking that some of the increased resources would go to buying down tuition. And so is there a way to quantify progress on making this a more affordable degree for Vermonters over the next few years?
I think the answer to that question is yes. I think that there's a companion recommendation in the report around this affordability standard that I think, from my perspective, is an important element in this, because it provides a common way to do the calculations associated with that. The question I have in my mind is, at what point in the 5-year process do you want to start seeing reductions in unmet need according to that? And I think that I'm not sure that year one is the place to start looking for that, but that's certainly up for discussion. But I think a metric related to that might be something we could signal.
Well, I would, we have President Garamella with us. UVM had just announced a 3rd year of tuition freeze. And I think that's been an important selling point for the university. I want to say for the average Vermonter, all of this might be so much noise, except for what is it going to cost me? So I take the point about year number 1, but if by year number 2, we could announce that there was a significant drop in the tuition and signal that more were to come over the course of a 4-year degree, I think that would be the best selling point we could make to incoming students. But understanding that, the fiscal situation is obviously very tough, and maybe going backwards on tuition cost isn't possible, but even announcing a freeze, wouldn't hurt.
We have already announced a freeze for next academic year for FY22. The board already voted on that, I believe, in December.
Oh, okay, and that's great. I know that there are other universities that talk about freezing tuition at a given level for the duration of your degree. I'm just suggesting that maybe there's a way for us to quantify efforts on affordability and to push the institution to bring those numbers down or to make them more attractive for potential students. Because otherwise, all of the rest of this stuff may work very well, but if we're still the second most expensive system in the country, it's all for naught.
No, I mean, I would just echo that certainly the board came up with their strategic priorities and affordability was the first one. So we recognize that's a critical issue. Obviously, there's financial implications for us because we've been historically so tuition dependent, but we're certainly, trying to figure out ways to do that. And we're currently, just thinking about different ways we can bring down the costs, and particularly if there are particular degrees or credentials that are of particular importance to the state, seeing if there are ways to work with the state to get those particular programs have tuition covered or some other incentive to reduce the cost on them. I know, for example, Vermont Tech has had some of the COVID money from the Department of Health went to help cover tuition costs for paramedicine. So if there are things like that, that are, again, workforce areas that are really critical to the state, and there's a way we can figure out a way to cut the cost for those particular programs, I think that's something we should certainly explore moving forward as well.
I also think when Brian and I were at House Education, Representative James, I thought I love the clarity that you talked to the committee about their responsibility. And one of them was next year really focusing in on what are the priorities? What do we as a legislature, what do we as leaders, what are our priorities related to higher education? And so I think that as you think about that, I think I echo what both Senator Baruth and Chancellor Zadatny are saying, but I also think that as the legislature wrestles with sort of public higher education in Vermont, what do we want that to look like? And I think, what do we want it to cost? So I think those two things are really important conversations going forward in addition to this work.
So, sorry, was somebody else raising their hand?
I think you were up.
It's me. Okay. I have so many thoughts. First of all, 3 cheers for what Senator Bruce said. I think affordability needs to be front and center first and foremost. And that if we fail to deliver on that, then we have failed. But I just wanted to sort of say thanks, Brian, for that list. And I think that this is going to be a really crucial section to add to the report, because I just wrote down, I realized I'll see it in writing later, but I just wrote down all of the suggestions you made, because it's definitely the first time that I've had or been able to have in my mind a really clear sense of the kinds of metrics and outcomes and guardrails that the legislature could start to think about as we move forward. So I think that's going to be a really important addition. And then I had another thought that went away, so maybe it'll come back.
It'll come back. Thank you. Others?
Just a quick, we use the term, Representative James, go for it. I'm not going to forget mine. You just remembered yours.
Thank you so much. It came back. The affordability standard. Let's not forget that in the implementation timeline that's already written, that is one of the legislature's suggested key tasks for next year. Okay, that was my thought.
So piling on to the affordability discussion, I think we need to be, it would help for this group or the group that takes this and brings it into fruition to do some research and understand what affordability actually is. And we use the term, but affordability is completely subjective and it's all based on value. And, you could make the case that a Mercedes could be all of a sudden drop the price to where everybody could afford it. But if you really need a pickup truck, then there's no value of that Mercedes. So I think we need to figure out how that affordability discussion really interweaves into the broader value discussion in what we're bringing to the customers of the VSC. And it's not always, I've been in plenty of discussions with 16, 17, 18-year-old young people. And yeah, saying it's not affordable is an easy out for a student who's grappling with this notion of somebody saying it's not worth it, or, just go do this, or and then they just go do that and they say it's not affordable. But then 3-4 years later, they realize there is value there, but now I don't know how to get re-engaged and I don't know how to get back into that pipeline. So understanding somehow what affordability actually is and how it equates to value across the spectrum of the customers that we're trying to reach, I think is what we're really talking about here. I just see it with so many young people. My wife sees it with so many young people in the high schools where you could make it free and they could be qualified and they would not attend because they're not operating it from the same place of understanding of the value at the end of that program, whether it's a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree or a master's program. It's just not. So I think that's the challenge.
Thanks, Jeff. Other comments?
Scott.
Yeah, Scott.
Thanks, Joyce. I had, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time in the conversation, but I had a couple things that I just wanted to kind of bring back in, perhaps as suggestions for things that we may either offline or in a meeting want to kind of talk a little bit more about. And, one, we had a partial conversation about the graduation requirement on FAFSA last time, and it's contained within the report. And, this is one, I think, Heather, you and I engaged in at least a kind of partial background presentation, but this is a fairly significant policy question. And, one that we as an organization have been interested in exploring in the past. But I think it probably merits a little bit further conversation. And it would be nice to know coming out of this, Heather, kind of where what coalition we could bring together in support of something like this. Would the agency be, supportive, the governor, and others, because that would help us start to think about how we want to invest our time and resource in that. And so, that's kind of one piece. The other thing that I've been reflecting on, going back to the performance, the metrics that you described, also is thinking about what resources are made available, whether it's through the chancellor's office or through the legislature to support the retention efforts that, we talk about. But as I went back and reread the report, it's, there is, understandably, we have a lot of data that we have provided with regard to high school kind of seniors and graduation rates and policies associated with that. And I think it's valuable for us to make sure that we continue to support the state college efforts to deal with the retention and graduation rate issues, because that is critical from a workforce development perspective, but also from a budget perspective for the, for the system. And then the third piece that I wanted to raise potentially is something, again, to talk about, even though the context for much of this conversation has been the health and well-being of the system, and in particular, the four-year degree granting institutions. At least when we VSAC take a look at the high school continuation rates, where we see the biggest gap between our numbers and the national numbers is in two-year programs. And, as the report points out, and I think Brian and Dennis have both spoken to, we, like New England, have a strong predilection towards four-year degrees, and for equity reasons, I support that. But we have both a regional and in particularly a state gap in two-year degree, kind of attainment, and we see that in continuation rates immediately out of high school. So it seems to me that, that's another area that we may want to take a little bit of time at some point to, kind of talk about, reflect on, be interested in NSHM's perspectives. Joyce has given great thought to this kind of, issue in the past. But I want to just put those on the table for consideration.
Thank you. I guess, Joyce, I don't know how you want to respond to Scott. It seems to me that there's a particular recommendation that we put into the last report for folks to consider, and we did have that conversation. This is the FAFSA requirement one. And the report went forward with it in there. And I don't know if that, for the final report, whether that is heartburn inducing for anybody in the group. That's one. And then the other two, Scott, items that you brought up are more of a, I think they are very germane to the discussion, and to a degree, I don't know that we have, I think on the second one, the workforce piece, we've tried in a number of different ways to put momentum behind the notion that sub-baccalaureate degrees, programming, marketing, trying to find what Jeff was talking about, that nexus between affordability and value. And I'm taking a flavor of that and saying at the sub-baccalaureate level here is important, but I don't know what else you would suggest that we might include on that topic. And then on the student success topic, we've put some data in, but I'm not sure that we've gone to a great deal of effort to advocate for particular kinds of policies and practices. And I'm not sure if you're suggesting that's what we ought to do, or anyway, so let me hear your thoughts in response to that.
Sure. Let me take the last one, and it's that, having engaged in these conversations in the past, with our institutions, that work is not inexpensive, on the retention side. And I think the broader point that I'm making is that it seems to me that that's a critical part of this conversation. And that as we think about the availability of resources from the legislature, I would just want to advocate for making sure that sufficient resources are being made available to support efforts to have a material impact on retention and graduation. So, and I think that was really as far as I was going, Brian. I'm not recommending that we endorse particular strategies, but this has been clearly identified as one of the kind of critical challenges that the system faces. And I would want to make sure that we acknowledge that there's an expense associated with that, and that we are supportive of investments that are designed to address those particular both institutional and student needs.
Okay.
And Brian, I would say, I think that maybe if we, how about Scott, thinking about it this way, that we flag it in this report, and then that is, there's an expectation, and I'm thinking, Sophie, in terms of our work, because I see the select committee's report again as the high level, and the real sort of picking up from that and taking it much further is the work of the Vermont State Colleges plan. And so maybe flagging it in this, and then the companion piece, that will make sure that then the Vermont State Colleges in our planning pay attention to that, and that there's, but I think recognizing that it costs and making sure that we are not ignoring that as we plan and allocate resources. Does that make sense? Scott and Sophie, you're one right on top of the other in my screen, so I'm hoping you're both nodding yes.
I would defer to Sophie with regard to that as a solution. My perspective was simply from a student perspective. It's an important issue, and we would want to be in a position where we're supporting, making sure that there are sufficient resources for the system to speak to it.
Well, I appreciate Scott pointing out, I mean, the retention strategies, I mean, I just know that, you know, easy to say, hard to implement. Like, you have to be realistic about how far you can move the needle on some of those things. Having said that, I also think it is really important to put effort, money and resources into student retention, because once we have someone that's in the door, I think we want to do all we can to make sure we retain them and that we, you know, they leave with something of value in exchange for the tuition dollars that they've paid. But my understanding is it's, you know, retention is a multi-year project. It's not an easy, you know, oh, you just put a bit of money into this and you see huge strides. Like it's hard work. It takes time and it takes money, is my understanding.
Other comments for Brian in terms of the things that he has described?
Joyce, it's Heather Boucher.
Yep.
I just wanted to just add a little bit to Scott's point on the universal FAFSA recommendation. So completely agree, Scott, about the need for significant buy-in if this is actually something that becomes actionable. I was very comfortable with it going forward as a recommendation. I think the next step would be for the General Assembly to really grapple with that idea. And, you know, there really needs to be political will all around for something like this to actually move forward. I think a lot of the pushback we might get would be within different communities where that would be a real change. And so I think it's appropriate that the General Assembly kind of grapple with that one. In addition to, obviously, if it moves and takes up steam, I think then the administration would certainly want to get more involved and think about it more carefully.
Thank you.
And Heather, that, you know, it's a really good reminder that we are putting recommendations into our report, that in the end, it's the legislature or the governor's office that really have to pick up those recommendations and move them forward. So we can put things that we really believe in, and then, you know, I assume that there will be some that they will pick up and run with, and others that they might say, okay, we'll defer a year, and then still others that, like, there's just not an appetite for it. So it's a good reminder. So thanks. Even though we would like to believe that all of our recommendations will be immediately endorsed. Other comments or questions for Brian in terms of their plan for other things that need to be included in our final report?
So what I hear is that we'll do some work. We will add some language, the language that I'm talking about, that's kind of the cleaning up and preparing a final draft type language, as well as some new content around what these timeline and metrics items might look like that you'll need to take a look at. And I think, and then this piece that I suggested about trying to formalize the handoff to the VSC implementation team, I think that's what that's the marching orders that I'm hearing, and that's what you should expect to see, unless there's anything missing that you're welcome to email later on. That's what you should expect to see the next time we have a draft ready for your review, which will be the last, I think, chance to give us your blessing or otherwise before the report's due.
I would like to ask, well, and anyone can respond, but particularly Senator Baruth and Representative James, would it be helpful in our report, the Select Committee's report, to either one, and I think Brian has said it, make reference to the VSC report, or put it as an attachment so that people see the level of detail. I mean, it's an evolving, it's just a point in time. Here's where we are. But I think that if people saw what Chancellor Zanotny presented to the board the other day, I mean, it's impressive in terms of what has to be done, the timeline and things. And I don't know if we want to mix these two, that's a question. But on the other hand, if it will help address some questions that come out of reading the select committee's report, is it helpful? So I guess I would start by asking our two legislators, but I think I would ask anyone to chime in after that in terms of, should these be kept separate? Or I can argue both ways. So first, Senator Bruce or Representative James, helpful or keep them separate?
Well, one thing I would say is that you find out very quickly when you enter the legislature that there's a constant rain of reports, and it goes on all through the season and all through the off season. They just come in from everywhere. So I think having two reports for people to look at is optimistic. I like the idea of attaching it so that it's there in the event that someone wanted to go for a long, deep dive into the VSC report. That would keep the select committee's report basically the one to read, and then it would be available by link or attachment otherwise.
I think would be great actually to include a link or an attachment. When I presented, I think it was just this past week, to the Rural Caucus, which is a group of legislators who are very interested in this issue. I sent out a link to the Select Committee report and also to the transformation page on the VSC website, which has then a link to the plan that the trustees adopted. And I think it was really helpful for people to see that concept of handoff and to help them understand what the legislature is responsible for, and then what the State College trustees and leadership are planning to do, already doing, and the work that's already underway. So I thought it was useful. I think people appreciated seeing both of them.
Representative James, you actually have a very good idea in terms of putting a link to the transformation page, not a link to because it constantly changes and evolves. So people can go there to get the latest, as opposed to a link to the current version of the report. That's a nice distinction. Other people's thoughts. Sophie, I don't know what your thoughts were. You and I hadn't really talked about this, but I thought I didn't want to pass up the opportunity to hear from.
Yeah, no, I actually like the idea of doing a link, because we will be updating it's a work in progress. So, if we were to attach what the board passed on Monday to our April report, it may well be out of date by then. So we tried to be as clear as we could that this was, the path forward. But, again, it's the plan is as good until you first start making all the changes, and then you realize, oh, maybe we need to tweak it here and there. So I like the idea of a link. I think makes more sense to me, because then people have the access to the latest and most updated information.
Other people on the committee, does that make sense? Nods, yes, no. Okay. So Brian, I think if we can put a link to the transformation page, that'd be great in the final. So the next topic was, I am curious, are there, and I think we've talked a little bit about this, but if there are other things that are areas of concern for you that are in the existing report that you have significant issues with, or that you like, I can't sign off on this because this is here, I would love to have you bring them forward now so that we know that I think Brian and Dennis have tried to work with each of you individually. I know that a lot of you have been emailing back and forth, and we've finessed the language. I'm grateful to being able to get where we are, but I'm curious if there are other folks now who have issues from the report that are just like, oh, this is like, I've been okay, but now I'm not. I just want to give people a chance to respond to that so that we have time to work through it. Well, silence is, so I would say, oh, Suresh?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I'd like you to chair all my committees, Joyce. You're just amazing at this. So thank you.
No, I have to say this is, I am sorry. One of the things I'm most sorry about is that we haven't been able to meet in person at all, because this would be a great group to spend some time with. So I'm very sorry that, but maybe sometime we'll have a reunion of some sort and do something in the summertime. So,
Joyce,
yeah,
can I
yes.
just say,
Yes.
again, I mentioned this earlier, and I think it might have some value for people. Not that I dispute anything strongly in this report, but I think everybody should have an opportunity to read the Labor Task Force report. I think there's some there is some things that are much in common with our report. I think there are some different innovative ideas. I'm not saying that we need to adopt those, but I think as we get ready, maybe we're looking to the final report, maybe look to the Labor Task Force for some ideas that maybe we haven't thought about. I'm just going to put that out there for everybody, that I think it's a short read. It's not a very long document. But I think it's worth it to give it some perspective of what people in the Federation have come up with, faculty, part-time faculty, full-time faculty on the campus, and what they see as issues. So I'm just going to throw that out there, as I think it might have some value.
I guess
Chancellor Zanotny. Yep.
Well, I just had one. I mean, I know at the back of the February 12th report, you have a chart that shows reports that you had reviewed and looked at, or that the committee reviewed and looked at. My understanding was that the Labor Task Force proposal was shared with everybody on the select committee. I just want to make sure I'm correct on that.
Yes, you are. It's a link on our webpage. Yep. And I know that, oh, go ahead, Sophie.
I was just going to say that I just need to acknowledge that Nevi put that together.
And I also just want to acknowledge too, that I do know that, Dan, I think your point is really well taken. But I also want to acknowledge that Brian and Dennis met with leaders of that group early on. So I think that there has been some cross-pollination, and I hope that I think that the select committee has, or I would say that Brian and Dennis have been very mindful of the suggestions and tried to incorporate where it made sense. So thank you for bringing that forward. But just a reminder for people, there is a link on there, and I assume most people have read that, but if you haven't, please go back and do so. Great. Other comments, other suggestions to move forward? What I see as next steps, and Brian and Dennis and Sally, you can correct me, but our steering committee will be meeting with NCHEMS as they work on the final draft, giving them feedback. And then in early April, you will all, as we've done in the past, receive a copy of the final draft for your input. And then they will prepare it, make all the final changes. And then what I hope when we send it to our final proposal, when we send it off, that I will include a cover letter acknowledging all of your work, and that this was unanimously endorsed, and off we go. And again, I think that will be. I think this group has done a number of things. I think we have provided some direction and guardrails to move forward for the VSC. I also think that, you know, it's been very interesting, and Scott, even today, the issues that you raised. I think there are a lot of things that we can flag in this report that we recognize need a lot more attention. And what I'm hoping is Senator Baruth and Representative James will be able to take some of those things that we flag, and that can be, I see that as work for both the Senate and House education groups in the future, because I think that we have named some very significant things that in order for the state to really design and develop a continuum of educational opportunities from early childhood through people's all their career changes. How do we make sure that we are providing that continuum, but also providing we're allocating our resources in the right place? And so I think that we have highlighted things like adult basic ed and adult technical education. And I think the whole affordability concept and things, I think those are really important things. If Vermont really wants to sort of be cutting edge around our educational programs, those are things that that really need attention. So I think this report has done a couple things. One, it's really focused on the Vermont State Colleges, and that was our charge. But I think we've also highlighted a number of areas that right now feel a little out of our scope, but definitely, as we've started to wrestle, need to be addressed in order for Vermont to really think differently about how we support education and how we fund education. When I say support, we think about this whole continuum. Brian, Dennis, Sally, anything more from your end in terms of your work?
I don't think so. I am. I've got some more marching orders. I will endeavor to get this report to you sooner than you have traditionally had a chance to review it. But as we sort of start to approach the end of this effort, on my behalf, and I think I can speak for Sally and Dennis. We've produced a lot of pages, a lot of different times, and I really get a strong sense that everybody has really committed the time and energy necessary to give us really thoughtful feedback in these meetings and elsewhere. And I appreciate it. It's made our work better. And I hope that generally speaking, we haven't conveyed any defensiveness if we've gotten some sort of critical feedback along the way and have had to rejigger things. It's been a terrific opportunity to work for you. And I look forward to saying that again in a month or so.
I think another piece that will be significant is crossover happens. When is crossover happening? In the middle of March?
March 12th and 19th.
So I think on March 19th, we will, that's March 19th is the budget, correct? So I think that's going to be really significant for us in terms of what the House recommends to the Senate in terms of budget changes. And so that will be, I think that will be a really important day. It'll be an important day for the Vermont State Colleges, but I'm hoping that our work here has really helped to inform some of those conversations. Okay, anything else for this group for today?
I just want to thank everybody for the really good input. I mean, today has been succinct, but very informative. Thank you all.
And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the terrific work of New England Board of Higher Education. Both Candace and Michael have really helped move this forward. And if anyone was ever in doubt about the contributions that Vermont makes to NEBI, they have more than earned it this year, and we need to pay it forward. So I am grateful, but thank you to Michael and Candace for your work behind the scenes, keeping this moving forward with NCHEMS.
Most welcome. Kudos to Candace mostly, and thanks to all of you for your very hard work.
And Candace, I do believe you did 11 focus groups. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right.
So, I think one of the questions has been asked, did we have public input? And I think we can assure them on a number of different levels. All of our meetings here have been public. We've posted a lot of stuff, but also under Candace's guidance, we did 11 focus groups. That's not insignificant. So thank you. Well, I don't want to keep people longer. I really appreciate your input, and we will gather again one more time in early April, and just prior to that, we will get the final draft. But I would say to you two things. One, if you have comments or concerns between now and then, please reach out to Brian directly. And secondly, when Candace sends out the draft in preparation for our meeting, I would ask you to take some time to read it, because it's really important that we provide them with all the input that people feel that they want to share. So thank you again. I really appreciate it. And off we go.